As everyone joins, we're going to wait a couple of minutes to see if we can get everyone in here. So stay tight. Room's filling up. We'll be starting in just one moment. Okay, it's that time. Welcome everyone. I'm James Flencha, Regional Resource Director in Washington, D.C. and Virginia for Care and Treatment Centers. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the topic, Breaking the Cycle of Drugs and Gambling, Treating Addiction Interaction Disorder in the Affluent Patient. As a reminder, we will be conducting this session in webinar format, meaning all participant microphones will be muted. We will not be able to see or hear you. During the presentation, please utilize the Q&A or chat features to ask any questions. Depending on the volume of questions, if we can't get to your questions before the end of the hour, we'll have someone from our team follow up with you directly. Today's presentation is eligible for 1 continuing education credit. We would like to thank our educational partner, CE Learning Systems, for assisting in providing these credits through co-sponsorship with the American Psychological Association. Please note that in order to receive your credits, you will need to complete the post-webinar evaluation. A link will be emailed directly after the presentation from cego.com. After finishing the evaluation, you'll have immediate access to your certificate of completion. Today, I am proud to introduce our presenter, Eric Weber. Eric is the Senior Clinical Advisor for Caron's Grandview and Legal Executive Professionals programs. Since 2007, Eric has been a clinician at Caron, working specifically with adult men and relapse patients in both primary and extended care settings. He has been a clinical supervisor for the men's primary unit and the director of the men's relapse unit and men's phase 2 unit. Eric is a certified alcohol and drug counselor and holds a certificate of competency in problem gambling, both through the Pennsylvania Certification Board. He is also a certified sex education therapist through the International Institute for Trauma and Addiction Professionals. Please welcome Eric.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Thank you for showing up today, virtually, of course. Welcome. Hope to make this informative, educational, and a little bit fun as well. I'm going to talk to you for about 40 minutes or so, then we'll open up for some questions. We have some questions that were submitted prior to this, so we'll try and address those as well. So let's start with the obvious. Addiction is complex and messy. No kidding, right? Like, tell us something we don't know, Captain Obvious. But the reality is that sometimes we get, for me, inpatient patient, for outpatient folks, client, you get a patient or client, and it doesn't look complex, or it isn't obvious what the complexity is. And a big reason for that is, like the picture on the left, the paint cans. You know, everything's well compartmentalized. And I know for me, so many of my patients come into treatment very well defended, very well compartmentalized, trying to keep, you know, the alcohol separate from the work, separate from the family, separate from being a parent, separate from walking the dog, or maybe walking the dog. We're going to throw some gambling in there that nobody should know about. Hey, why don't we have, you know, some prostitutes and a boys' weekend out? I mean, let's just get, you know, mayhem going. But it's important that all those things are happening, but nothing's mixing together that shouldn't be. And that is the energetic plight of the active alcoholic addict, to try and maintain and have some sense of manageability of all these things that are going on and not let them touch each other in any way that's harmful. And the fact is that over time, much like a paint can, and when I bought my house was built in 1931, there was some old paint cans in the basement, and the paint cans, being, from various decades, started to rust, started to leak, paint was flowing over, and it makes a bit of a mess. They start to seep. The compartmentalization breaks down. And for those paint cans that are still strong, for those patients who come in well defended, well compartmentalized, part of our job as clinicians is to break down some of that compartmentalization, break down that defensiveness, to see how stuff's really going to interact, because it typically will interact. And to bring that to the forefront, to bring that to light, to bring it to awareness for the client, for the patient, to start to work on that. And so when I give this portion of a lecture to the patients here at Karen, I say, how many of you really try to keep all these things separate? And everybody's hands go up in the audience. And I said, okay, how many of you had an intervention? And some hands go up. I said, how many of you felt like somebody dropped a hand grenade in the middle of that paint, and now we're on the right side of the picture here, and it just felt like a bad Jackson Pollock, right? Like, holy cow, how did you know this? And how did that happen? How did this interact? And just things get really out of hand really quick. And so this is what unmanageability starts to feel like for a lot of the people we're working with, our patients and our clients. And so on some level, our job is to mix the paints together a little bit, or see how they're mixing together. And another level, it is starting to separate some of these paints again. So if we have somebody who's struggling with alcohol, gambling, extramarital relationships, right? It just, or throwing anything else you want in there, workaholism, and to see how maybe we need to be able to tease out what's related and how it's related to each other. That's what this is about. And so we're going to progress through today's webinar, taking a look at some of these aspects. So when we talk about addiction interaction or addiction interaction disorder, really we're looking at the complexity of how addictions interact and complicate recovery. And I want to highlight the complicate recovery, because that's really a big piece of this. If I have somebody who says, hey, look, Eric, I'm drinking way too much, I'm here for my alcoholism, I say, okay, let's talk about your alcoholism, let's do first step, let's talk about paralysis and manageability, we're talking about 12 steps, we're going to get you to a program, we're going to teach you about getting a sponsor, going to meetings, so on and so forth. We really work hard on the alcohol piece, but we never bother to talk about the gambling. We never talk about intimate life and how that may be affected or is affecting drinking. We never talk about the workaholism that's happening. And, especially with the affluent client that, most likely is going to have work issues or work things to talk about. It's a big part of their personality or their identity, if you will. How does workaholism impact the ability to get sober from alcohol, drugs, or anything else? And that's a big factor. We'll talk about workaholism a little bit later, but I will do a spoiler alert. I read something somewhere within the last couple of years that said workaholism is the best dressed mental health problem we have. I'm going to say that again. Workaholism is the best dressed mental health problem that we have. And I'll tease with my patients and say, look, it's the one addiction you get rewarded for. You really engage in it. Somebody's handing you an attaboy or an attagirl, they're handing you more money and they're handing you more of it. Now, unless you're the chief cocaine tester at the cocaine factory, nobody's going, wow, you really snorted more cocaine than anybody else. Good job, we're going to give you more cocaine. It doesn't usually work that way. It usually works like, who did all the blow and why isn't there more, right? And so with workaholism, when we start taking a look at that as an interaction with some of the other things, it becomes important. It really exemplifies why we need to take a look at addiction and interaction disorder and how it complicates recovery and why we need to address it. The second bullet point, addictions do more than coexist. They, in fact, interact, reinforce, and become part of one another. And this is work of Patrick Carnes, so I want to credit for that. So normally this slide is kind of dynamic and we didn't get the animations working right. But the question for this slide is, what does your addiction look like? And you'll see lots of pictures on this one. We have the obvious in the top right-hand corner. We have alcohol moving counterclockwise. We've got pills, narcotics, whatever. We've got money, can be an addiction, can be a source of obsession and compulsion for folks. Moving down to 9 o'clock, we've got gambling. I'm certified to treat gambling. I get most of the gamblers on campus here at Karen. And this is a big thing that's becoming more and more of a problem increasingly. If you're in a state that is legalized gambling or has access to online gambling, you know what I'm talking about. Moving down, addiction to technology. It's always interesting to take somebody's phone away from them, see them start to sweat. You swear you just took their heroin away from them, and they're starting to go into withdrawal. Somebody loses your phone, and I know we've got a lot of people out there that have a necessity, they rely on their phone or on their technology. I have a colleague right across the table from me. If I suddenly closed her laptop, I'm sure she would start sweating profusely and want to kill me instantly. I don't know if I call that withdrawal, but her eyes just got big right now. She can't believe I'm talking about that. As we move, it's a very real phenomenon, especially anybody who has children, teenagers in particular, very susceptible to really getting, hooked on this. And if you take it away, it's such a significant impact. Moving across sex, love, relationships, we've known about the issues with this since very early beginnings of AA. The slogans were coming out, basically 13th stepping somebody, you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be engaging in a new relationship within the first 12 months of your sobriety. Why? Because they knew that it was taking people out and a big source of relapse. Exercise, while it's good for you, can it become pathological and problematic? Absolutely. Moving through to work, the little gentleman with the briefcase. I work with a lot of executives, a lot of professionals, and work is a complicating factor to recovery. Is very important to talk about. And then finally, at 3 o'clock, we have food. As I'll tease with my patients sometime. Look, you come to inpatient treatment. We tell you when to get up, go to bed, go to group, go to get your meds, do this. The last thing you might be able to control is what you put in your mouth and how much you put in and what you do with that. So food can very much become an addictive process for some folks, and complicate the recovery process. We're talking about alcohol, drugs, and other things. So, when we take a look at this slide, the montage, really there's lots of things that can become problematic. In and of themselves, none of these things are problematic. 80, 85% of the population can have a drink or two, and it doesn't ruin their lives. There is this, that percentage of people who are going to develop an alcoholic addiction and dependency, and they're going to struggle. And for a lot of other people, it's not a big deal. Keep going around the wheel here. Yeah, everything can be done in a healthy manner. It's when it becomes unhealthy that we have to start to take a look at it and say, all right, what's going on here? So I just want to review, if you're not familiar with American Society of Addiction Medicine, or AASM. AASM are the doctors who specialize in addiction. If you have an eye problem, you go to the eye doctor. You got a foot problem, you go to the foot doctor. You got a skin problem, go to the dermatologist. You have an addictions problem, addiction doctors who we talk to. And so I'm not going to read all this to you. I just want to highlight a couple of points you all can read. But starting at the top bullet, addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, and memory-related circuitry, right? The last sentence, reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing reward. Pathologically pursuing reward. And I think that's incredibly important. The word pathological, and I'll ask folks, what does that mean? I'll say, well, pathological liar. What's a pathologist do? And interesting enough, I had a pathologist in treatment one time, and his job, as he described it, was to find out what was wrong. And so we talk about pathological. Pathological is a deviation from normal. That's what it literally means. It's deviated out of what we consider a normal range. And so we say, okay, we all like to pursue pleasure. That's normal. If sex didn't feel good, we wouldn't do it. Why? It's the most ridiculous act two human beings do. Think about what you do. I'm not going to go to graphic detail. But if aliens were looking down at us, they'd be like, why are they doing that? Because it feels good. It becomes pathological when it becomes damaging to other areas of our life and out of the norm of what we would call probably healthy. And finishing this sentence, by relief of substance use and other behaviors, AASM is not limiting the definition of addiction to just drugs or alcohol. It's looking at other behaviors can become problematic with pathological pursuit. So I think it's an interesting, a really good encompassing definition that I appreciate, because if we can take a look at some of the addictions that people, quite frankly, will tend to scoff at, something like shopping addiction. Well, just close your computer. Okay, just put down the beer. Wish it was that easy. And problematic insofar as everybody's got to shop for something at some point. So how's the shopaholic, how's the person who struggles with pathological shopping manage that? We can get into that a little bit later with some thoughts. All right. The next point, and again, I won't read the whole thing, but just the first sentence, is characterized by inability to consistently abstain, right? Consistently abstain. And this is where you need to reflect if you're working with somebody with a binge pattern of use. Binge drinkers are the most common one I can think of. Somebody says, look, I only drink 3 days a week. All right, what happens when you drink? I don't know. I black out, or it's unpredictable. I have no idea whether I have 3 or 30 drinks, but I only do it 3 days a week. The other 4 days, I'm fine. That person has no less of an issue than somebody who's drinking 7 days a week. It's just manifesting itself different. We can still talk to them about paralysis unmanageability. So I think it's important to understand that the inability to consistently abstain, and there's impairment in behavioral control, right? That those are some of the hallmarks we need to be able to take a look at when we're talking about addiction. All right, so do just a quick little biology review here. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. If you're laughing, you've dated yourself and you have a sense of humor. Thank you. If I had you all live, I hope a couple of people are chuckling. I thought this was funny. But let's get back to the brain. And I want to take a look at the instinctual Fs. So I think if I use the little pointer here, I think that shows up. So just want to do a quick review. Frontal lobe. What's the point of the frontal lobe? Frontal lobe is our thinking. It's our cognitive ability. It's our executive function. If I say 2 and 2 is, if you at least thought 4, your frontal lobe's starting to work. Your parietal lobe is going to be major motor function. I can snap my fingers, walk, talk, do a cartwheel if I could. I'd probably fall on my head, it'd be kind of funny. Occipital lobe, that's going to be our vision. It allows me to parallel park with depth perception. It allows me to see color, so my bow tie matches my suit. Temporal lobe is hearing. More importantly for us, is language. This is where words form meanings and connects with the frontal lobe. So I say pink elephants. You're now thinking of pink elephants because I said it. Or if you're like me, you're thinking of Pink Floyd, JFK Stadium, 1994. It was a great concert. And the elephants, I could see the wires. Thank you. Cut your brain in half, and we're going to look inside your brain. And we've got this little section here, this little squiggly snail-like section called the limbic system. Hopefully, most of you are familiar with that. If not, I'll go through it just ever so briefly. Your limbic system is what controls the Fs: fight, flight, food, fornication. If you're a Freudian, it'd be your id, right? This is an emotional response and desire in response to the outside world. Somebody puts ice cream in front of me, I want to eat ice cream because it tastes good. I don't have to think, gee, I like ice cream. I should probably want some of that. Yeah, I'm going to have ice cream. It says, ice cream's good, have some. The frontal lobe goes, hey, wait a second, you just had a big meal, maybe not have quite as much, or maybe wait a little bit. That's the stopping point, right? Why is this important? I think it's important because the limbic system is the part of the brain that gets dysregulated in active addiction. It's the part of the brain that's dysregulated, takes over, and starts to affect other parts of the brain, right? It's the reward system, and it goes haywire. It's like an 800-pound gorilla just smoked a bunch of meth and wants to ruin the kitchen. Guess what? Give it a banana, you run, because you're not going to be able to battle it, right? So, again, why is this important? I go through this with my patients, and especially my affluent patients, who typically rely on their intellect and their willpower through most of their life. Whether they are, work their way through higher education, whether they come from a family system of means, whether they built themselves up from nothing. For the most part, most of my patients who are affluent are really relying on intellect, logic, thinking, might have some emotive life or some emotive ability, some emotional ability, but a lot of my patients tend to kind of push that down a bit. And so when they talk about, gee, why am I drinking too much? Well, gee, why can't I stop doing the cocaine? Gee, why can't I say no to this? And they really start beating themselves up because they think, I should be able to think myself out of this. I should be able to willpower my way out of this because that's how I handle everything. And so going through an explanation of the actual brain, the physiology and the brain chemistry of addiction, I find is helpful insofar as it appeals to their intellect. So I'm meeting them where they're at, and starts to reduce a little bit of the guilt and shame that they can say, okay, I'm blaming something that's not at fault here. It's not my thinker that's at fault. It's that thing deep inside that's really part of my survival mechanism, starts to shift a little bit. And when we start talking about, not being your fault, but it being your responsibility to take care of, allows them to move into the recovery zone a little bit further and a little bit easier. So I just want to spend a little bit of time on that to give you a sense of which some of the work with the affluent patients can be helpful. This is a diagram I found I thought was interesting. I'm not going to spend really any time on it other than to say, this is a feedback loop when we start talking about intoxication, withdrawal, stress, synaptic, symptoms, and the response to alcohol, just how it all kind of loops around, and it's all integrated in that midbrain. The letters are a little small in the middle, so I won't try and get into those. All right. Won't spend a whole lot of time on neurochemistry. Dopamine and serotonin, why are these important? If you know anything about alcohol or drugs, for the most part, any major drug of choice, alcohol, narcotics, opiates, basically they're going to raise dopamine, they're going to suppress serotonin. That's the basic function of that. When we talk about other activities that are pleasurable, same thing's going to happen. You're going to have a dopamine rise and a serotonin suppression. Very specifically, I'm going to ruin Valentine's Day here. They've done studies of neurochemistry in sexual experience. And when somebody's in the middle of a sexual experience, dopamine is rising, serotonin is falling. As somebody comes approaching climax, there's more dopamine. At the point of climax, dopamine spikes. That's the aha moment. Hormone gets released, and the dopamine is instantly starts to decline. The serotonin comes up. Hope that was good for you, right? And so that's the biochemistry of what we all seem to enjoy. And I hope I didn't ruin Valentine's Day for you too badly. Why is that important? Because that's what crack does as well. That's what cocaine does, right? We take that out of somebody, what's going to happen? They're going to start looking for it in other areas. They're going to go to the craps table, going to go to the blackjack table. And most of my blackjack players are stimulant users. Every once in a while, I get a blackjack player who likes opiates, but not usually. Normally, it's people that want to go up. Why? They want to lean into the action. They want to get excited. They want all that instant gratification. Poker players can be a little different. But if you take a look at some very specific gaming, what is it that is happening so far as the stimulation? And so taking a look at how the basic neurochemistry, dopamine, serotonin, is affected in these various behaviors. So you can see where they start to get connected, they start to replace one another. We'll get into some of those relationships in a minute. But it's all connected very much in the brain chemistry. All right. So let's talk about a few of the types of addiction interaction disorder. So withdrawal mediation is when one addiction replaces another. If anybody's here quit smoking, I quit smoking cigarettes in December 31st, 1995. It's been a while. But I remember very specifically, like wanting to shove every piece of candy I could possibly find in my mouth at that time. Anybody who's quit smoking knows you just sort of get this thing of, let me replace it with something else. If you're old enough to remember the television show Kojak, Telly Savalas, who played Kojak, always had what? A lollipop in his mouth. I still don't know whether that was the actor or the character that was replacing smoking, but that was a piece of the storytelling they were doing. That would be an idea of withdrawal mediation. Somebody who instantly stops drinking and doing cocaine may find themselves really attracted to pornography or online gambling because it's a substitute. Replacement is somewhat similar, but there's some specific differences. Replacement is one addiction replaces another with most or all the behavioral features, and it happens well after withdrawal subsides. So a very brief story. I had a patient many years ago who was an opiate addict, came in, spent 30 days with me, did well, went home, and by all accounts was in recovery, seen a sponsor, his therapist, back to work. Life was good. He began gambling around March Madness, put $5 on a game. Hey, that was fun. $5 on another game. You know anything about March Madness? There's a lot of games we played. $5 here, $5 there, $10 here, $20 there, $50 there. Next thing you know, finds himself with a bookie. As he's telling me the story later, he says, "Eric, where did I find a bookie? I'm an addict. I can find trouble anywhere. I found a bookie. He's got a bookie. He's got bets out. He said to me, Eric, I'm gambling like a junkie. I'm gambling like when I was shooting heroin." His words. I said, okay. And he talks about how the gambling got to the point where he wasn't telling anybody about it. He was hiding it. He was lying about it. He was hiding in the bathroom stall, checking. This is back when we had Blackberries. He was checking his Blackberry under the dinner table. And he was out with his girl. He was skipping work eventually. And so things came to a head, and he wound up relapsing on his drug of choice just because he couldn't stop the gambling. It all kind of came crashing down on him. And so that's an example of how, as he was in recovery, something crept up that he wasn't seeing as a problem until it became quite the problem and brought him back down. So we see this quite frequently, particularly in the first year or two, that something else will start to fill that void and becomes pathological and problematic and unhealthy. We just want to be mindful of that as we're working with people in the longer term. Cross tolerance is when one thing allows for a greater amount of something else. Probably the most recognizable one I know of is alcohol and benzodiazepines. If I'm building a tolerance for alcohol, I will naturally have a tolerance for benzodiazepines. They sit in the same receptor in the brain. Other things that can happen is I build a tolerance for alcohol, maybe my tolerance for gambling, how much, how often, what kind of stakes, what kind of games or bets. As I build tolerance for one, I'm going to start to do more of the other, and they really push each other up. With alternating cycles, we see this actually a lot in inpatient treatment. Somebody comes in with a history of eating disorder, a history of spending, a history of workaholism, but they came in for their drinking. Can't drink on campus, so the drinking stops. So we start to get that addiction under control. And then something else starts to pop up. Maybe the eating disorder starts to pop up and starts to become more problematic, or the spending becomes more problematic. We're getting packages from Amazon every day. Where did this come from, right? And there may be several things that are happening in serial. They're going to happen one after another. As one goes up, the other go down. Put this one down, this one comes up. For some folks, this is going to be pretty predictable, that they know if this is going to happen, then this, then this. For other folks, it's a little more like whack-a-mole, or I'm going to stop drinking. We'll see what pops up next. Not quite sure. But most folks will have, if they're struggling with addiction reaction disorder and they have alternating cycles, they're going to have a kind of a cluster of behaviors they typically struggle with. Something new may pop up here or there. But usually by the time they get to us, an inpatient, we can sort of identify that and start to work with that if they're aware of it. So rituals, to me, is an incredibly important one to talk about. The addiction interaction, they call it rituals. In the rooms, you would say people, places, things. What are the things that I do to get prepared in a sequence in order to get to the end game? So I know I've got a weekend without anybody knowing where I am or caring where I am. So I am going to start the ritual of going to the casino. And that's going to be going to the bank and making sure I have some cash, because I don't necessarily want credit card receipts on some of the things I might purchase, whether those things are legal or illegal. So I'm going to want some cash. I'm going to take some clothes, maybe not. I'm going to make sure that I'm prepped with enough chemicals so that when I get there, I'm good. I got my room stocked, right? And as I'm prepping myself, I'm getting excited. And as I get to the casino and I walk in and I hear the lights and the dings and the bells, and I get my chips and I go where I need to go. And all of this is building. All this is based on ritual. And some rituals may be incredibly, the word I'm looking for is entrenched, incredibly entrenched. I think of the pornography addict who says, look, I'm going to close off the room. I'm going to make sure the curtains are drawn. I'm going to make sure that I have my drink or my drugs here next to me. I'm going to have any other accoutrement I need. And as I open up the computer, back in the day, you had to let it warm up. I mean, I remember desktops. It took 10 minutes to get on AOL, right? Modern day, this ritual is speeding up a little bit. Open the computer, it's on, website, and then there's the ritual of what do I want to watch, what do I want to do, and all the while, one addiction feeding into the other. And so these rituals become very important to be talked about, so that if there is something in there, say driving home from work and passing a liquor store, every day I stop at the liquor store. Do I need to find another way home? The ritual starts with me getting out of the office, loosening up my tie, starting my car, and going, the liquor store's on the way. It's not even the drinking, the liquor store's on the way. And really paying attention to that sequence of events, because that's all lighting up my brain in synapses that are connected. All right. Fusion, I think, is the last one we're going to talk about. Fusion is where some addictions are used simultaneously and eventually become one entity. Was recently talking working with a patient who did online gambling on his phone. He would do slot machines on his phone, and it was earphones, phone, and beer. And he wasn't drinking if he wasn't gambling. He's not gambling if he's not drinking. If he starts to do one, the other one is there. They are completely mixed together. That's what we call full fusion. I'm doing one, I've got to do the other. For a lot of my patients, it's stimulant drugs and extramarital relations, usually prostitutes. If I'm getting a prostitute, I'm doing cocaine. If I'm doing cocaine, I'm getting a prostitute. They overlap. For a lot of folks in the gambling, it's going to be some sort of chemical, whether that's alcohol, narcotics, opiates, what have you, that there's going to be at least a partial fusion, Partial fusion, that center graphic, is where for the most part, if I'm doing one, I'm doing the other, but there might be an instance or two where I'm just doing cocaine, an instance or two where I'm able to have sex without cocaine, haven't gone quite to full fusion. Right? The binging fusion, that's usually experimentation. That's usually seeing what things feel good together and then going back for a second, third trial run. And then that starts to, the synapses start to really connect. And then we're going to get into partial and full moving forward. All right. So I love the quote from the NA basic text, obsession and compulsion. We know well the two things that make up true addiction, obsession and compulsion. And, obsession and compulsion, it's about what's going through my mind, obsession, that thing that takes us back time and time again to our drug of choice, and compulsion. After one pill, one drink, one fix, we're stuck in a destructive grip greater than ourselves. I'm paraphrasing the text, but that's basically 2 paragraphs. And so when we take a look at these behaviors, it's really not about judging can they be addictive. It's is there obsession and compulsion in a pathological way that's unhealthy. So I want to talk about, because we're really talking about the affluent patient. I want to spend a little time on that. The affluent patient has resources. That's part of what defines affluency, right? It's the ability to be at this particular station. And so I want to talk about various resources that I talk to my patients about. One of them is time. The affluent patient typically has the ability to make time. Now, time may be consumed with work, with other issues for my patients, because I work in, particularly I work with, especially with the attorneys. I work with all the attorneys on campus. Work is a huge thing, but they also tend to make time for other various activities like drinking and doing drugs. And then time gets taken away because it's limited. It's finite rather. You have only so many hours in the day. Then it starts to get taken away from other places. And so for a lot of my affluent patients, the time with family gets sacrificed for work and for other chemical activities. Money is the obvious resource that people will talk about, but money's not the only resource. I was having lunch with a colleague of mine the other day, and he made the comment, "What's the absolute worst thing that an addict could have?" I'm like, "I don't know, more alcohol, more drugs." He goes, "No, more money." And I appreciated that, because I've had patients who said to me, "Eric, my biggest problem is I won't run out of resources, and that's going to kill me." Where somebody else may run out of resources and hit rock bottom, mine's going to be different because I won't run out of resources. And it's a very real issue when we're dealing with the affluent patients of, how are you going to manage this thing that's really a fuel in the fire, and be able to talk about it without shame, without issues of feeling less than humble. Money is sort of a dirty thing to talk about for a lot of people in various circles. And so when we're talking about money, I think it's important to be able to talk about it in a non-judgmental fashion. Other resources for the affluent patient are going to be influence and control. I was with a couple of friends the other day, and somebody was trying to talk. He says, "Look, I'm E.F. Hutton. When I talk, I want people to listen." And we all kind of chuckled, and then we shut up and we listen. And so that was influence and control. And so if somebody is in charge, somebody's the head of the company, they have influence and control. If they are hired to do a job, and that job is incredibly important, they have influence and control. And so a lot of our affluent patients are going to be in a position of influence and control. And again, that's going to allow to manipulate the other resources to come into play to fuel the addiction. Independence. If I'm independent, I'm not accountable to anybody. And that can be a very big resource for drug addiction or other addictions. The environment itself, right? What does the environment look like? Is it an environment where I'm less likely to get myself into trouble, or I have people around me to enable me, to make sure that I'm safe, all right? And so we're talking about this a little already. How do these resources impact addiction? Well, obviously, time is going to give you the ability to do more, right? Money is going to give you the ability to do more. It's going to give you the ability to influence people. You know, influence is going to give you the ability to do more. Independence is an interesting one because a lot of folks who may not be as affluent will have more accountability. When we talk about independence, the more independent I am, the less I'm impacted by the world around me. My manageability doesn't feel the same. Just doesn't feel the same, right? I don't have to worry about what work thinks. I own work. My name's on the building. You don't like it, hit the road, right? I've had patients who've had, personal assistants who make sure that there is a fifth of whiskey on their desk every morning. That's a true story. I'm like, did you put that in the job description? Like, how do you arrange that without somebody raising the eyebrow? But it was the way the environment got created in this gentleman's industry, and that was considered the norm. I work with attorneys, all the attorneys on campus, and the environment they work in is work hard, play hard. There's a lot of industries like that, but particularly in the attorney sector, they drink, period. There's bars in the office. In big law, there's usually a bar in the building somewhere, or at least within a walking distance. A lot of the business of the legal profession is done at steakhouses and in bars and on the golf course where there's lots of drinking. So the environment can be incredibly influential in normalizing, not just saying it's okay, but normalizing the use of drugs and alcohol. Think of the music world. I'm a musician by hobby. I've been in the recording studio. Somebody could walk in with an 8-ball Coke. Nobody blinks an eye. I would, but nobody else is going to blink an eye. That environment is supportive and almost encouraging of, right? And so if you go on certain industries and you're going to go on a conference, the environment is, we should be drinking. One of the biggest things I work with my affluent patients is how to golf sober, how to go to dinner sober, how to sail sober, because all these activities, alcohol is ubiquitous and drugs are ubiquitous in some of those, right? And so looking at the impact of the resources, the environment is going to have a huge impact on the addiction, and quite frankly, the recovery as well. As we work with affluent patients who want to return to some part of their life, not have to change everything. They really want to carve this out because the other stuff seems pretty good, right? So we need to really take a look at these resources, and again, from a non-judgmental way, be able to talk about what is the impact, how do they need to be adjusted, or how do you need to work on some defense mechanisms, being on the golf course and not going to the 19th hole. Just being able to do something different. So I think we've talked about this a bit. Behaviors to note with resources, sex, love, and relationships. Obviously, making time, having influence and control. Workaholism is probably the biggest one I work with outside of with the attorneys, and then dropping down to the gambling. When we take a look at resources, whether it's time, money, environment. So I'm in Pennsylvania. We have casinos that have opened up, and we have online gambling that's legal. So the environment that's been created in the past relatively short period has really given rise to a tremendous amount of increase in gambling behaviors, and I would suspect gambling addiction. I do have some numbers. I'm going to skip ahead. In the pandemic, because things shut down, it really affected how people managed their addictions. In the state of Pennsylvania, we had state-run liquor stores. So when the state basically shut down, in Pennsylvania, you couldn't buy liquor. People panicked, were driving to Delaware and Maryland to buy liquor, and all of a sudden, then you could buy liquor online. And the volume of liquor sold online in 2020 pretty much broke the website for the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board. It was really astounding, to be honest with you. And liquor sales skyrocketed from the previous year. People were afraid they weren't going to get it. And I don't think they were hiding handles of whiskey like they would distilled water in the basement. A lot of that was getting consumed. We take a look at the gambling statistics out of New Jersey, state of New Jersey in particular. They publish every month what the revenue is in online gambling. They have to for taxation purposes. And if we took a look at the numbers from 2019, for June, July, and August of 2019 for online gambling, and then compare it to June, July, August 2020, the increase was anywhere from 200 to 300%, 2 to 3 times the revenue in online gambling. Doesn't take into account that people were going to casinos. Casinos were closed, so just be fair with the statistics. But the behaviors have changed tremendously based on the environment that was provided, right? And so when we're taking a look at working with the affluent patient and working with the various behaviors, and even within the context of the pandemic, what's been happening, lots of online activities. You and I are online, we're virtual. We're all hopefully getting more comfortable with Zoom and WebEx and everything else that's out there. So the person struggling with pornography addiction is spending more time on their computer. The person struggling with gambling, online gambling, spending more time on their computer. The person struggling with relationships who might be on, well, they closed Craigslist down, but other websites, how many dating sites are there? How many dating apps are there? And they're on our phone. They're embedded in the technology. The ability to engage in addictive behaviors is embedded in the technology. And you take the affluent patient who's going to have newest, best technology because that, within their wheelhouse. And we need to be able to address that, right? And so that's a big thing, dealing with, I really don't want to look at porn, but it's like saying I'm an alcoholic. I'm carrying the liquor store in my pocket, right? And so being able to pay attention to these things and come up with some meaningful and useful interventions for them. I've gone so far as to have patients get new phones. Go get a flip phone for a year. I don't know if you guys remember, I'm old enough to remember flip phones when you had it like type texting took 5 times, 10 times longer than it does today. My colleague and I were talking about just not even texting, just talking into the phone and it texts for you, right? Back in the day, the flip phone, you had to really get your thumbs in it. And if that's a necessity, that's a necessity for some folks. Happy to recommend that to patients who need it. But for us, really paying attention to the resources that are there and how they influence the addictions, and we really working particularly with the affluent patient. So I've been talking at you for well over 41 minutes straight. I'm going to invite James back on. I told him to look for the clown. That would be the last slide of the presentation. So the clown face is up. And so, James, I'm going to open it up to you to take over.
Thank you, Eric. I always learn so much when I listen to you present. And my new takeaway is the term full fusion. Very interesting. We've got some questions that were sent in during the registration process that I wonder if you would have a few minutes to address. The first question, affluent clients may not have experienced any or maybe only possibly minor negative consequences for their use. What are some suggestions for helping them understand that they have a substance abuse problem, and I'll expand on that, or an AID issue and need to take treatment seriously?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Rock bottom has the implication of losing everything. And for most of my patients who are affluent coming to treatment, there's usually 1 or 2 very specific things that are causing discomfort. Most of my patients have not lost their house, they've not lost their job, the spouse may or may not be hanging in there. A lot of times, especially I'll speak to the attorneys in particular, because that's where I think we can give a poignant look at this. There's usually one thing that we need to key on. For my attorneys, it's work. Is your work in danger? And how in danger is this? And are you willing to risk everything? It hasn't happened yet, but here are the possibilities and walking through that. So I think it's a case, especially with somebody who's going to be a little more intellectual, be a little more cerebral, to actually go through an intellectual exercise to walk through what very well may happen, the ghost of Christmas future. And so we can do that very logically, which appeals to the way they're thinking at the moment, the way they're experiencing. And I think the key for clinicians is to find the one soft spot, that one spot that's a little sensitive. And whether that's being a parent, for a lot of my patients, they'll come to realize that as a parent, it's been an impact. Relationships, you don't have to have lost everything, but are you willing to lose your relationship? What does that mean to you? And again, work is an incredibly important one, especially if there's starting to be some sort of impact on work. And it doesn't have to be big. I always relay a story a patient told me years ago. He was a very, very wealthy man, came in, basically because his best friend told him, dude, you're drinking too much. Go to treatment and at least take a look at it. So he said, okay, I'll go. And as we went through the process, about 3 weeks in, I said, how are you feeling about this? Just kind of tell me your experience. He says, Eric, I look at it as like a glass elevator. I'm on it and it's dropping. Not fast yet, but it's going to start picking up speed. I can look down and see where it ends, and I'm really not interested in that. So I can choose to press the button and get off anytime I want. And I think now is a good time to get off because I simply don't want to go any further. And it was a really enlightening conversation for me because it was a way to be able to understand that people don't have to hit rock bottom to see where rock bottom could be, and to help make a choice to get off the proverbial elevator. And I share that story a lot. I mean, that's sort of like meat and potatoes for me to share. And I invite anybody to use it, please. But to really walk through the process of, okay, it's not where you are, but where those words are the gambler.
So speaking of gambling, are the behaviors of gambling and substance abuse intertwined? Is there ever a dominance in one of the addiction over the other? Or are they closely related that they are treated as one?
Great question. I think part of what I do here is really try to answer the question of chicken, egg, scramble, right? Which one is which? How intertwined are there? I will have patients where they say, look, when I'm drinking, I'm gambling. If I don't drink, I've got no desire to gamble. Okay, so we have an addictive process and we sort of have a linear progression. Other folks won't necessarily have that linear progression. And so when we take a look at drinking and gambling, I'm just using drinking as an example. Drinking and gambling, what is the relationship, or is there none? I can drink and gamble, or I can gamble, drink, not drink. And that's a case where I need to address both addictions simultaneously, right? And they're going to be addressed fairly similarly. When we take a look at gambling treatment in particular, unlike other process addictions, gambling, I can say, don't gamble. And we can live through life without gambling in a traditional sense, right? What is gambling is a different question because you can get sort of in a gray area. But I can basically say to somebody, look, gambling is much like alcohol or cocaine use. Abstinence is the best policy. When we take a look at something like sexual addiction, love addiction, food addiction, shopping addiction, excuse me, workaholism, those are all things typically that are part of the primary process of being a human being. And so the difference is the recovery is going to look a little bit different, right? I may say to somebody, look, don't have this particular type of sexual activity for a period of 90 days. Let's do an abstinence base. But at some point, we're going to reintroduce it in a healthy way and maintain it, have a different relationship with it. If you have somebody who has a food addiction, I'm not going to tell them not to eat for 90 days. I mean, great diet plan, but I don't think it works after about 3, 4. So it's a case of, okay, we need to figure out a new relationship with this behavior and this activity. Shopping, same thing. Unless I've got a butler, I'm going to the grocery store. I'm going to go get gas. I'm going to pay my bills. Even if I have a butler, I got to pay him, right? So, it's with those process addictions, it's taking a look at how to manage that and in a recovery way that makes sense and is healthy. Looking at the behaviors is healthy. With gambling, the question was, I'm going to treat it a lot like any other chemical dependency and say, look, we're going to work on an abstinence-based deal here. I think the question becomes, what is gambling? It's sort of the obvious. Online poker, blackjack, going to the casino, betting on football, all that kind of stuff, where there's an obvious something on the line. One of the unique things about gambling is I can bet in my head. I'm gonna actually talk about my internal process. If I were to not say this, I bet you I can get Julie, who's sitting across from me, to put her phone down in about 10 seconds. Now that's a gamble I'm going to make. She doesn't even know she's gambling with me. She doesn't even know she's a pawn at this point. But if I can get her to put her phone down, Julie, would you put your phone down? I just won because she actually put her phone down. Now, as a gambling addict, I'm on top of the world, right? And that's the dangerous part when we talk about treating gambling. Is a lot of it is it's not so much a behavior you'll see. That behavior truly is in between my ears. And so once I start getting hooked on that, I just got a little bit of goosebumps because I'm a pathological gambler and I want her to put her phone down one more time because I want to win. She just did. She is feeding my addiction right now. She's killing me. She's killing me, James. I'm going to a meeting right after this. Jokes aside, when we take a look at treating them, you can pick your phone up. We talk about treating them. The abstinence-based model is going to be the same, in my opinion. Harm reduction is a little tough with some of these. And back to the fusion piece, you said full fusion is your new buzzword for the day, or your new takeaway for the day. Is it a full fusion, partial? Is there any fusion? How are they related? And through assessment, looking at the South Coast Gambling Screen, the Gambler GA20 is very helpful. And then also just a good clinical interview to say, how are these things going on, and getting some collateral information. What do the people around them see? What do they notice? What hasn't been described to me? That was a very long answer to a short question. I hope I answered it.
Yeah, when I'm out speaking with clinicians, every once in a while I've got an eye roll when I speak about Karen's executive program or signature programming at Ocean Drive, which is for the highly affluent. And your comment about that particular addict who had unlimited resources and that was what was going to kill him really touched home that there is a need for this type of programming. And it's like nobody has any brakes on the car if you have unlimited resources. And so how directly is the subject of money, wealth, status, or power discussed with the patient in terms of staying sober?
I'm fairly direct with all those things, especially somebody with monetary needs. And I appreciate you talking about the eye roll, because there's a couple of prejudices in our society we don't talk about. We love to talk about the prejudices that are out there in front of us, but we don't talk about two that I'm rather passionate about. One of them is obesity. Everybody likes to be judgmental against fat people, period. Don't argue with me. It's just the way it is. And money. If you've got money, what are you bitching about? You should be happy. Roll the eyes. Oh, these people think they're so special. Roll the eyes. And people with affluence can face a tremendous amount of social criticism for something they didn't even ask for, right? And so I think it's incredibly important if we're dealing with affluent people to be able to judge where their level of sensitivity is with what they have. I do a group once a month based on workaholism, and I ask everybody to go around and introduce themselves. Who are you? Where are you from? And just 2 sentences about what you do for a living. And it's fascinating to me how much people downplay what they do for a living in that room. Because I know, because I've read the chart and I've interviewed all of them, or clinically talked to all of them. And I'll have exceptionally successful people. I'm a business owner, right? And sometimes it's out of honest modesty, and other times it's out of self-protection because they don't want to be judged for what they have. And so for the person out there rolling their eyes, that kind of goes against anything we learned in counseling 101. Carl Rogers, unconditional positive regard. And yet the affluent patient is typically faced with a lot of social pressure to hide a certain amount of that or to apologize for it because they're supposed to feel badly for having more than the average person. And that is a significant issue if we're going to get somebody open, honest, and vulnerable in the therapeutic experience. For my patient to come to me and say, Eric, I'm going to tell you how bad it is. In a blackout, I bought another fishing boat and another Range Rover, and I don't remember either of them. All I got was the bill. I don't even know where the hell they're parked. Now, that sounds like a joke, but that's the level of unmanageability for this patient. And he didn't run out of money, but he did run out of his family support and family saying, all right, we had enough of this crap. You're going back to treatment for the 4th time. And looking at me saying, Eric, please don't judge me, but I'm not going to run out of resources. I'm going to die. Please help me not kill myself. Now, I hope nobody rolls their eyes at that, but that's the reality for some of these folks. And that's quite frankly, why I'm on the unit I'm on.
Yeah, thanks for addressing that. Speaking of families, and we know addiction is a family issue, what are the best ways to treat addiction interaction disorder in the context of, say, couples therapy?
Well, I think one of the primary things, it's funny, I just had a call from an alum this morning, 2 years sober, and the wife called me and said, hey, I'm struggling with this one thing. Can we talk about this? Sure, spent 10 minutes on the phone. And one of the things that was so important in this particular couple was using non-pejorative language, finding good, honest, but non-pejorative language to discuss what the addiction or action what disorder is, especially when we're talking about infidelities and stuff like that. Understanding the nature of addiction and having acceptance of the nature of addiction as a disease. Why did he choose to cheat on me? Well, if he's an addict, he didn't choose in the traditional sense, right? Why did he choose to go drinking? Well, if he's an alcoholic, he didn't choose to go drinking. That's what an alcoholic does. And so having some acceptance and some common ground on what addiction really is and what the language is and how to feel safe sitting in the room talking about the things that need to be talked about. If we have those three things, the common understanding, the language, non-pejorative language, and that safety, that's where, and we're talking about couples, but any family system or any work system, that's where you can start to make progress. When you have a system that doesn't provide an environment, doesn't provide safety, common understanding, or a language to talk about it, there's going to be struggles moving forward. So to me, that's really the foundation and base of that.
Excellent. This is a terrific one I wanted to touch. This one was just sent in. Affluent patients aren't told no as frequently due to the factors you named. How do you challenge their thinking and treatment when you need to say no to them? How do you say no to the affluent patient?
Usually with a smile on my face. I'm sorry, that's sort of sarcastic, sort of not. Sometimes it's talking about no. It's, what's your experience with having heard the word no? And I'll ask, what's your experience having the word no? What's your experience with boundaries? Excuse me. I had a gentleman recently, he says, look, I grew up, the rules didn't apply to me. All right, now you're going to be going on recovery, the rules apply to you, because if they don't, you're going to relapse and you're going to struggle. So here's the suggestions I'm going to, suggest you take. And so, when we're talking about telling an affluent person no, it's really, I think, starting with what is their experience with no in the past and how do they feel about it now? Because if I just babble them with no, I'm probably going to lose. My patients call an Uber, they go home. So it's a case of, let's talk about this.
Eric, thank you so much again for your presentation. For those live questions that were sent in, we'll be sure to respond back to you. As a reminder, the presentation is eligible for one continuing education credit. Watch your email for a link from cego.com to complete your evaluation. Before we close out today's session, I'd like to share some upcoming webinar opportunities available from Karen. Please save the date. Karen is hosting our 6th annual Addiction Research Symposium on November 4th and 5th. Presenters are from NIH, the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, Johns Hopkins Medicine, and our own Karen Medical Leadership. Registration will be open soon. It's a terrific event. I encourage everyone to make time on your calendar for that. On September 29th at 12 p.m., we'll be hosting Carolyn Echek from Second Chance Addiction Care out of Maryland, who's presenting the topic, Therapeutic Confrontation and Substance Abuse Treatment, Setting Boundaries and Challenging Concerning Behavior. Also, we will be hosting a virtual open house for our Karen Grandview Men's program in Pennsylvania on October 7th at 12 p.m. This will provide a unique opportunity to meet our team, learn about our services, and take a virtual look inside our elegantly appointed facilities. We hope to see you again at one or both of these virtual events. In the meantime, please reach out to your local regional resource director at any time for additional information, resources in your area, or questions regarding admissions to any of Karen's programs. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.